Good afternoon, everyone. So today we're going to discuss about the recent RBI policy, and I'm going to open up with very brief discussion about the industry impact. And so basically, we have seen that after a lot of discussions, RBI has come up with certain specific guidelines, certain mode to follow, which we are kind of uncertain of. So on the basis of whatever information is there according to the RBI circulation, I'll just quickly kind of point out what are the concerns for the industry as a whole, and later on other presenters will talk about the other issues as well. So briefly, I think most of us already know about the few restrictions that RBI has tried to put in. Specifically, they try to now regulate the entire industry, mostly the NBFCs, through this priority sector lending status. And in terms of the priority sector lending status, RBI has set up a few restrictions in terms of the income of the household and indebtedness restriction of the household. So income for the rural area has been defined to be 60,000 for the household, and the total and for urban areas it has been discussed as like 120,000, which is much higher than what originally Malegaon Committee report suggested. And the indebtedness restriction has also been increased from 25,000 rupees suggestion by the Malegaon Committee to 50,000 rupees, which is kind of higher again as initially seen by Malegaon Committee. So let's quickly go through this particular income and indebtedness restriction limits for qualifying these priority sector funds. We think that these particular limits, which has been put forward by RBI in terms of 50,000, 60,000 in the rural areas and 120,000 in the urban areas, this particular kind of restriction is very difficult to be implemented on the ground, and specifically for Indian system and any system with a lot of people working in this unorganized sector, it is very difficult to know their or guess their actual income, and also their income level varies from different seasons. So I don't know how the RBI kind of find out that it's going to be very easy to implementable so that the MFIs can follow that. They have suggested that possibly a chartered accountant will certify that, but we do have a big question about chartered accountants' capability. When the economists cannot do that, how they are going to kind of come up with that one. So that's going to create huge amount of uncertainty, not only among the MFIs, but also the banks. Specifically, the banks may not be sure whether the particular limit which has been certified by the chartered accountant, whether it is being following the norms or not. And more than that, it will kind of reduce the access to large number of clients, because this 60,000 limit in the rural area is kind of restricting a lot. For if we see kind of a daily wage earner, possibly 2 people working in the household, which is like 20 days per month, if we just calculate in that way, like their income limit is going to be almost on the verge of the this particular ceiling. And also it is very difficult from the perspective of the MFIs to also know, because some of the seasons they may come up with, for example, with a bumper harvest, their income level is very high, and with a kind of lean season, income level is low. So if they start up with a particular identifying a client with a low income, in the next season it might be the case, or next year it might be the case that income has increased much above the certain, particular limit. So it will be difficult from the RBI's, from the MFI's perspective to ensure that whether to lend that particular individuals who are lying on the verge of the income limit, like little less than 60,000 or even like closer to 60,000 limit. Then the next one, we do see that it is going to increase the cost from the MFI's perspective in terms of ensuring the compliance. And if the chartered accountant thing is ultimately kind of given the final say, that is chartered accountant is going to certify that income limit is the income limit of the borrowers, then it will be difficult for the MFIs to get it done, because the chartered accountants on the ground may not have the exact information about that. Now, and also we do see that this purpose of loan restriction, which has been put forward by in this particular RBI regulation, it's kind of going to create some problem, because first it's going to be difficult for again ensuring that implementation issue once again, because I don't know, like for an MFI, it's very difficult to know unless they do some monitoring whether the purpose, stated purpose is the actual purpose. So maybe the RBI needs just a particular statement from the customer or the client that, you know, we are going to make use particularly for income generating purposes, and that actually undermines the other purpose of the loan. For example, like, you know, most important is the emergency management and consumption smoothing purpose. So those are not given priority in this section, because from one of our study we found that, like, unlike the income generating purpose, these two purposes like emergency management and their other type of medical expenses do play a large role in ensuring, in their debt limits. Now I'll quickly go and talk about this impact on the pricing of loan, and we have seen that RBI has set a cap of 26% on the APR and 12% on the margin. So it will be, we see that it's kind of going to result in industry concentration, and also somehow it is going to reduce the outreach and create kind of outreach concentration mostly around the urban and semi-urban areas. And it will be very difficult for the smaller MFIs to maintain that 26%, to survive with this 26% interest rate limits. And also we would like to, possibly we would see some merger activity, especially for the MFIs which are working in the remote areas. They will not be able to possibly liquidate themselves. And we also see that the large MFIs will find it difficult to expand to the remote areas. So possibly it will be better, from their strategic purpose, to kind of concentrate mostly on the urban and semi-urban areas where it's very easy to acquire the client and the cost of acquisition is much lower. So it's going to create some geographic concentration as well. And also, not only that, in order to maintain this, or go ahead with this 26% of interest rate limits to reduce their cost of operation, they might kind of increase the average loan size, or we can expect some kind of debt pushing by the MFIs. They can fix up a particular household, and once they know the household is okay, then possibly they might give them 3 loans with the limit of 50,000 each. So it can raise their revenues with a lower cost. So that might also happen, which is ideally the RBI wanted to kind of get rid of the situation, but somehow the policies might not drive them till that direction. And we also see that it's possible that the MFIs will definitely face some fund crunch through some of the NBFCs which previously supported the MFIs to their bulk lending. Since the RBI has said that no other than the MFIs will be getting the priority sector lending status, so there will be a fall in the particular channel. And also for the equity investment, we think that it's going to be negatively affected given the uncertainty as well as the profitability limits. So that's, I think, grossly for the industry. And I think I'm going to stop here and then.
As Samson said, well, there are great negatives to this, but it's completely against the spirit of financial inclusion. What really happens to a rural household, that around 61,000 doesn't have access to family services, completely unfair. Or the fact that if 60,000 isn't sufficient as a cap for household income in the rural area, when a farm using variety of a cow and house cost something around 40,000 to 50,000. I think overall what it does is provide an incentive to fabricate data or provide or lead to inaccurate reporting, because you can start using several other proxies to verify it. And that would eventually lead to a richer proxy. And consumption smoothing is now possibly, it's an area that we're going to be. There are also positives to the entire process. But for one, it's completely brought about clarity on the fact that there is this entity which is called an NBFC MFI, which is regulated by RBI, which is a great positive. And the fact that priority sector lending is now automatic through such a category is a great positive. It signals to banks the importance of continuing credit to the sector. Unfortunately, what they haven't altered is the fact that reporting will still continue at the end of the day. So, unlike quarter on quarter, this will again lead to a funding of funds to the sector, possibly in the third and um, it also creates an opportunity for us because if funds flow from banks after the certain fourth quarter, then obviously other institutions can step in and get it's moving that. There is some ambiguity on whether the CSS Act will continue to exist for bilateral assignments. And I think the committee that will be set up this report tomorrow is the 26% cap, 26% plus a 1% upfront loan plus effectively 28%. It's something that most MFIs have been working towards in the last 6 months, at least in the medium to large MFIs. The small MFIs will continue to take the challenge. The efficient margins are 8 and exist. But I think that's why institutes like Atma maybe is very important. Ensuring that, field office of productivity institutes. That will provide patient capital which allows them to set up processes and systems in place that will improve their reporting. The kind of what is the kind of origination that now the field officer has to do. And I think the one great signal that they send, which is based on the client's point of view, is that deficits can be obstructed and that the communication regarding the interest rate has to be completely independent basis. It's something that we've been insisting for a long time. It will now happen every time. That's broadly it from the exercise. So, just in terms of our own operation, what we are planning to do is just make sure that the MFIs can sort of handhold them to ensure that they get a recovery and that we continue to that the origination practices continue to be done. So, for instance, what we've seen in the new age MFI that have been set up in the last year or two is that loan utilization has become mandatory. The 10% of things reported as income generation, that's possibly something that we start. So far, we just said that if you not have it as a practice, then you will otherwise, you will also, the kind of information that is captured in the loan application form now has to increase. And perhaps a small to medium MFI will benefit from the larger MFI in their practice. And all of this information obviously has to be captured in an MI. So, funding to unsecured funding is invested to build certain MI systems is so for the small MFI, maybe kind of capital becomes really, really critical because as I said, equity funding is likely to come down as a huge the need is for instant capital.
Sure. Sorry? Control up and down. Hi. Thanks, Santosh, thanks actually for that. In terms of IFMA Capital, we are kind of. I'm going to just focus on what we feel are the implications for IFMA Capital's business as a result of this. So, bottom line, we think all is well. Clearly, the feeling that we have from the way the RBI has brought out the guidelines is that the RBI could have very easily stuck to the Malegaon committee report. Okay, there were states which had come out in public in the papers and said that whatever the Malegaon committee report represents is already too diluted. and clearly there would have been pressure on the Reserve Bank, to do what they had to do to, negotiate with the state governments and come out with something which would be acceptable to both. The RBI has come out with guidelines which seem to indicate that they do favor the sector in some way. There has been a PSL status retained for NBFC MFIs, and this is to be seen in the context of, all other NBFCs which have, to their great surprise, lost PSL status. So we have, entities like Shriram Transport and Sundaram Finance and, many large NBFCs which are actually, providing services to, let us say, small road transport operators and so on, which was a huge PSL asset, which don't have the benefit of this PSL anymore. So we still continue to think that it is not that things can only look up from here only. So from IFMR Capital perspective, business as usual. In contrary to what Santo said, what we think is there are very few avenues for banks now to obtain PSL. Banks have not necessarily been able to scale up their own direct lending program so much. Banks have not necessarily achieved the best success in their direct lending program so much. They can't now buy assets of Shriram Transport or Sundaram Finance and call it PSL. So where do they put money? Are they really going to? Of course, the sector is considered risky, and there are state government risks that are remaining, and I'll go over those risks in a minute. But clearly, it seems like the PSL story is not necessarily dead, and banks will not necessarily favor large entities over small entities really, because I think banks will need to fill that vacuum in the last quarter of the year. What could have happened, certainly I think, as we discussed earlier, is that banks could have easily made this, the RBI could have easily made this PSL reporting quarterly. This was a point that Jayesh had covered. So if that had happened, that would have made the fundraising efforts of the sector much more robust, much more evenly spread out during the year. Maybe we'll see that come out in the master circular on priority sector that typically comes out on 1st of July. But that could have been done. In the absence of that, still, we don't feel that it is necessarily all bad for the sector. We feel that there are some positives. There are some positives with regard to things like income generating loans and income of the household. With whatever experience we have had of how NBFCs and MFIs arrange chartered accountant certificates to show priority sector lending. Getting chartered accountant certificates for showing household income and showing how the money was used for income generating activities may not necessarily be a great problem. So given that, secondly, as you all know, household reporting of income is very inexact. It is largely self-reported, and we have seen how borrowers can take advantage of systems to get the best terms that they want. So frankly, in our recent conversations with MFIs, MFIs have only expressed some relief that the RBI regulations have come out the way they have come out. On the other hand, there are some negatives. Clearly, an MFI will not be able to house multiple asset classes within a single balance sheet to de-risk its balance sheet. So an MFI cannot, like a KGFS does, an MFI cannot offer multiple services under one roof, under one balance sheet, both secured, unsecured, and so on, because there is a cap, because the qualifying assets have to be unsecured. So that certainly is a problem. So already there are clever bankers who have come and said, find an MFI, lend the MFI, lend to a borrower. The borrower has a guarantor. The guarantor gets gold as security. Now, this is with the letter of the RBI notification, but clearly, there is some issue with the spirit. But you may see such ways to beat the regulation come out. But at the end of the day, you can't have an MFI offer mainstream gold loans or mainstream low income housing finance loans or used commercial vehicle or two-wheeler loans, clearly. That is a problem. But clearly, MFIs will now look at other businesses where they can make or improve on the return on equity. Clearly, from iFirma Capital's perspective, our work on new asset classes has to really accelerate, and it has accelerated as well. And probably by May end or mid June, we'll have a decent set of underwriting guidelines covering 3 or 4 asset classes. I also said I'll cover the legal aspect of the RBI regulation, and is it really giving as much clarity to the sector as we think. It will be useful to see this in the context of the fact that every state, as you all know, has moneylenders laws. We have recently gone in detail over two judgments where Sundaram Finance was an appellant. So Sundaram Finance filed suits against the Kerala government and the Gujarat government with regard to the fact that there was some registration required or interest rate reduction required under those respective states' moneylenders acts. The Kerala High Court ruled in favor of the Kerala government, saying that the Kerala Moneylenders Act should prevail. The reasoning given by the Kerala High Court was that the Kerala Moneylenders Act as a concept is to protect customers, and the RBI regulation is to protect depositors. Okay, and therefore the RBI regulation falls short of protecting customer interest, which the Kerala government has to do, and therefore the Moneylenders Act provision on interest rate should prevail. The Gujarat government the Gujarat High Court struck down the Gujarat government and said that Sundaram Finance was correct. RBI regulation should prevail because the regulation brought upon by the central government should always prevail over a state government, even if the central government regulation came 40 years later. Okay. Now this matter has gone to the Supreme Court, and this will be a very keenly awaited judgment to see really whether a state Moneylenders Act should prevail or whether RBI regulation should prevail. This is a very useful context because there's this question of whether Andhra will fall in line or not fall in line. Why is the RBI not taking a tough line on Andhra? Well, they're not, because the matter is under sub judice. The RBI has written to several states saying that please do not regulate NBFCs. We are doing it, but that has not necessarily happened. In terms of our own business and our due diligence on MFIs, we'll have to make some changes which have already been partially put into place in Q3 and Q4. We'll have to focus intensely on financial analysis as against our focus on systems, processes and management today. We need to be very clear that how can MFIs cut operating costs? Are they doing what they can? And if the interest rates come down, will MFIs continue to make profits? What is going to be their any net worth erosion that can happen? Will MFIs need to raise equity, and so on? So a focus on financial analysis, working on a very detailed financial model which can answer some of these questions for us. How can MFIs cut down growth to cut down operating costs? These are questions we need to answer. From an investor relations perspective, unfortunately, we can't afford to ignore banks. In the same monetary policy, the RBI has also said that bank treasuries can no longer invest more than 10% of their liabilities in liquid mutual funds, which means that there is going to be a rapid pullout of funds from mutual funds over the next 6 months. 6 months is the time given for bank treasuries. So approximately 60,000 crores is going to go away from mutual funds, which means that mutual funds are going to be struggling for liquidity. To give a case in point, we recently met with Religare Mutual Fund. Religare Mutual Fund has set up a specific fund called the Credit Opportunities Fund, which was supposed to invest only in riskier assets, where the investors would be adequately told that this is what you're investing in, and therefore the value of investing can go up and down. The fund reached a corpus of 2,500 crores, but when the liquidity crisis struck, it came down to 100 crores. So imagine the kind of pressure on that fund manager who has to, borrow from banks overnight at 20% to meet redemption requests. Because clearly that fund would have been holding largely illiquid assets which would have been difficult to sack in the market. So given this background, when liquidity is flying out of the mutual fund market, they're going to look at only P1 plus, only liquid securities. So it's going to be, so all the work that we have done in building a mutual fund franchise, we'll have to kind of start all over again and go to bank treasuries, go to life insurance, go to general insurance. We are facing challenges on the life insurance side because there are very, very strict IRDA guidelines that prescribe what an LI can invest into and what it can't invest into. So we have to find our way around that. We also have to make a concerted effort now that the regulation is out in reducing the risk perception in the market. Clearly, that has taken a beating, and even now, SKS stock is not helping. SKS stock price is not helping. So we have to make a very concerted effort, which we had been doing on a periodic basis between MES and Capital, going out to investors and talking to them and telling them that all is not lost and things are holding up. So that push has to be even more concerted now. With the help of IFMR Finance Foundation, IFMR Trust as well, because we need to build the perception again that this is a mainstream asset class which now is as good as any P1 plus or AAA asset. So that's pretty much the implications on IFMR Capital side. Yeah. The only other thing is that there are other opportunities for us, because now there are going to be other mainstream NBFCs who could have raised PSL but are not able to. To put this in context, 90% of the off-balance sheet market in India is PSL driven and happens through bilateral assignments to banks. Pass-through certificates as a mode of security is confined to 5 to 10% of all the off-balance sheet transactions in the country. Now that can change. Clearly, if banks are not incentivized to pick up portfolios from NBFCs, and NBFCs like Shriram Transport have been used to do 30% of their funding through off-balance sheet, clearly they have to reorient. Now, of course, this is not entirely clear, and we have to wait the master circular on PSL in July to see what exactly happens. But if this is the current status quo, then there are going to be opportunities. There are going to be more and more NBFCs coming and trying to attract mutual funds or trying to securitize their two-wheeler portfolios or used commercial vehicle portfolios and so on, which is an opportunity for IFMR Capital. Thank you.
So before I start getting into the KGFS per se, I thought this is a common statement that most of the people in rural finance have heard. We repeating to each other and repeating to our external our interactions with external people that I am KGFS and I am not a MFI. Right? Those of you Khan fans know what it is. So, from the context of KGFS, the MFI is not an option that is built in the genetic code of KGFS. That's not how the model is structured. And anything that impacts MFI industry per se opens up two things for KGFS. One, an impact in the short run or short term, and an opportunity in the long term. Both have its own implications in terms of our day-to-day life. But I thought I'd just put the context of the market where we operate, the priority sector market, and very specific to what my friends have just explained, the impact pertaining to the microfinance class. The scope of Malegaon is in response to what happened in Andhra Pradesh and with specific to microfinance institutions. And in the monetary policy, the section under which it is dealt is under the section of microfinance. So one of the ways of looking at the whole thing is it pertains to the discussion or clarification or the notification under the entity level treatment given to priority sector lending than asset level. This gets further strengthened by the fact what Jayashree quickly mentioned, that in the same section, I'll stay here. In the same section, you also talk about a new committee that is proposed to review the priority sector guidelines. You also talk about fresh guidelines that would be issued under direct origination and securitization, which means there is a lot of action in store, and when there is a lot of action in store, then there is a lot of anxiety in store. Till the AP ordinance and Malegaon came about, our experience has been when we go to the bankers, rating agencies, journalists, is always to tell them how we are different. How we are not an MFI. How we do not fit into the parameters that they have in terms of their program limits or the pool sanctions that they normally have to sanction the MFI. And we have had a tough time. Once the AP ordinance came and Malegaon committee got formed, the difficulty in explaining why we are not an MFI eased a bit because people started to know what an MFI is. But the difficulty in raising money persisted. Because here was a situation where people who have exposure to sector started saying, you know what, there is a big fire. Let me take care of it before I get into new sanctions. And people who knew microfinance started saying, yeah, we always thought so. That you are the guys who are redefining how microfinance needs to be done. And people who don't know microfinance started knowing the difference once we explained that what is this microfinance business about and how a KGFS model is fundamentally different. But having said that, it is easier to explain than generate some liquidity for the operations on the ground. So let me not paint a picture that all is well for KGFS, but all is well in the long run. Yes. Okay. So when I actually look at, I don't know, it's the experience with most of you guys who have gone through your academic travails and hardships, that on the day of graduation is where you feel great about what you have gone through, not when you are going through. Right? When you go through, you know what it is. So in the short run, whether you are an MFI or not, if your dependence for wholesale funding is from the same source, you have a problem. So liquidity would be an issue for the entire sector as a whole. And till such time KGFS defines its niche or its place in the hierarchy of institutions, we have to work a bit harder. But let me just give a different perspective to this. Priority sector as a directive is not a voluntary target that RBI as an institution has given to state-owned banks. It was a mandate by the government, which in turn led to the nationalization of private banks. And the purpose is that there are pockets and sectors which don't have and need access to financial services. And the fundamental premise is that if you provide a branch bank in areas which don't have presence, natural demand will come in and that people would get access to all these services. So we all know what happened after 2 phases of nationalization, the number of bank branches that have been set up in rural areas and the licensing of your branches being linked to presence or absence of your rural branches. So any fundamental shift or fundamental dip in the overall assets towards these segments is not a desirable outcome, even at a regulator level. So I'm sure, people at the policy level will be mindful of what is the impact, or what are the fundamental issues that we need to address, than looking at curtailing few here, tightening some of the avenues that we have. It was a good static that Vineet mentioned, that 90% of the overall priority sector is through indirect modes, not by direct origination. And direct origination, be it when bank branches had their own branches. I have worked in a rural branch of a nationalized bank for 3.5 years. That was my first posting, not out of choice, but I got a letter saying you are posted to this branch, which had the address of Canara Bank, Main Road, Belagal. I thought there could be some supplementary road. Little did I realize it was the only road that this village had. In any case, I have worked in a rural branch, and I have worked the motive of people who work there, including me. All that I did is look at the calendar and year. And those 3.5 years indeed looked really, really long before I got out of it and got into Hyderabad. That was from Malgudi to Manhattan. Okay. So, if you have a national structure with a punitive posting linked to rural banking, direct origination is not done. Then come the VC. First, at least 1.5 years when numbers picked up in the VC front, and we are running a pilot on the ground on VC. Not done. Direct origination, directly by the bank, when you have branches which think, branch managers who feel that the direct originator is not my collaborator but a competitor, is going to do it. So there are challenges in the direct origination. Coming to KGFS per se, when we say we can look at it two perspectives. PSL is not equal to rural finance, and PSL is not equal to the entire asset portfolio. And asset business is not equal to KGFS. KGFS is built to be a full financial provider. And my friends in Center for Microfinance would know that several of the product level behaviors that we observe on the ground, when you take a JLG 50-week loan, could be a committed savings product. It might not have been borrowed, or the loan might not have been taken for consumption or income generation purpose alone, but could have been a committed savings product. And when you have products which are non-asset products, and we have a suite of products, all of you, most of you would know, the value proposition that KGFS as a model brings is completely different. And linking that with the spirit of priority sector, we are operating in geographies which, by definition and our own strategy, are the ones which don't have formal financial institutions. Quick recap, we open branches where there is no private sector bank operating, and not more than one branch of a state-owned bank branch being operational, and in the 105 branches where we operate, less than 10 villages or 10 branch locations have a bank branch operational. So geography-wise, we are operating in areas where we just don't have a formal player for direct business. Two, take the assets. If you take asset-wise classification, because when you look at PSL at a microfinance institution level, it gets classified as other sector. But as all most of you would know, 40% is a broad number. There are sub-limits under that, right? And it has been under consideration that these sub-limits also become sacrosanct going forward. When the 18% agriculture, when 13.5 and 4.5 between direct agri and indirect agri, all these sub-limits get tracked sooner than later, then the ability to two things. One, traceability of the customer and the asset. Two, monitoring the end usage. Both become very critical. And in a structure or in a scenario where you are locally present, you operate in geographies where there is no one operating, have the ability to originate, as Vineet said, both secured and unsecured kind of assets, ability to trace the customer and monitor the end usage of the loan is a very, very unique situation that you can imagine to be in the long term. So, caveat is that that's in the long term. The short run, we have to run around for liquidity. Now from microfinance department, we have to go to rural banking department. But considering the fact that there are sectors like real estate, like infrastructure, even I understand a small bank like City Union Bank has around 200 crores of portfolio around to chit funds, not under priority sector. So we have options to generate liquidity, but there would be an impact on cost of funds. It would not be at the levels that we would have liked or within our business plan to raise that. There will be a significant increase in our cost of funds. But considering the fact that the immediate competitor for us, considering that it is an MFI, and considering that they indeed follow the Malegaon caps, is 800 basis points. We are currently at 18, and the closest competitor is at 26, with all caveats that I said, considering that it is MFI and that they have the cap. We definitely have the legroom to move after. And cost of fund being not in our control is a variable that we have considered in our business plan, subject to changes, because it's not something in our control. What we will not pass on to our customer as increase in interest rate is our operational efficiencies or lack of it. Both. Okay. So KGFS can indeed collaborate, because one, you are operating in areas where there is no one. Two, you have the ability to generate multiple assets, not just the other priority sector assets. Have the ability to track the customer, have the ability to monitor the end usage, and the paraphernalia that is required to generate assets directly. Your technology, your operations on the ground, then ability to fulfill the requirements to originate products, because the draft guidelines on outsourcing entails that credit functioning is not to be done by the entity on the ground. So you need to have the ability to reach out to the principal at regular intervals. Places KGFS in a very, very unique situation to collaborate with banks and other entities in fulfilling their priority sector requirements. One last point, again, looking at it from an optimistic perspective, eternal optimist that I am. If some of the entities which otherwise had got money from banks to fulfill, say, the bank's priority sector requirements, do not qualify to be the priority sector assets, that much money or that much pool is what gets released or what gets available, or what becomes a burden for the bank to fulfill or to originate. They have to look at entities like KGFS. We have to do a bit of our own advocacy and telling in terms of how we can do it. But the propensity of these guys to be willing to collaborate with our kind of entities is much higher. So just to sum up, at an entity level, KGFS is not built for PSL. There is a huge opportunity, and PSL is going to stay at the asset level. It's not a internal thing of either the financial services industry or the banks, but it is the national agenda. And the operating structure around which the KGFS is being deployed and built on the ground places KGFS in a very, very unique situation of being able to leverage the developments in the market. Short term, there will be challenge on liquidity. Difficult, not impossible. We have to run around more aggressively in telling who we are and why we are doing what we are. Being an MFI is not a choice that KGFS has, because there is some regulatory change that has happened. That's not the fundamental base of the model. And direct origination as an originating strategy is not something that the banks have seen success and can pursue to reach their targets. Question?
Definition between rural and urban is yet to come. Now, rural and urban, how is it going to define as something that is well, we don't know, because banks have a very different categorization. IRD has got a very different categorization. Governments have got a very different categorization. So this is a new concept. I mean, that's something that needs to exist.
So just to quickly add, in terms of the 60,000 and 1,20,000 limits, in the most remote parts that we operate, when we quickly ran test of how many of our customers have incomes beyond or above 60,000, 74% of our customers have income above 60,000. And all these are self-declaration. You know, we have never had the reason to verify, nor is it verifiable as other speakers have mentioned. And in our overall pool of assets that we have, considering the asset level classification that the priority sector, master circular on priority sector entails, 92% of our assets fall under one category or the other. And the most important insight for us is, if we apply the qualifying definition or definition of qualifying assets, 16% of our assets, only 16% of our assets qualify to be the microfinance assets. It is both 50,000, less than 50,000 overall borrowing, less than 60,000 annual income, and good structure. So entities which have the real and complete information, we want to disclose the complete information, we have done.
It is important to have on an income generation enterprise should not make vertical sense. The enterprise is bound to grow year on year and the funding are bound to grow. And the 50,000 cap in the real estate. You don't do that for other industries. The only reason why it's based on industry. It is run by a venture.
So there is another gap in terms of where entity, although entity will go after availing a loan of let's say 50,000. So they are not responsible.
It all kinds of distribution. Right? The person will technically borrow from a corporate entity and pay the borrowing. You should have small proprietary limit
What would be the cost of the gap in funding cost? For example, if it's PSL lending versus exclude NBFC where it doesn't qualify for PSL, what would be the how many bits would be the?
For example, in March, Tata Motors Finance sold PSL assets of over 1,000 crores at a pricing of 18.5%. This was the time when banks base rates were 8.5% or 8%. Pretty much they were doing that base rates or base rates of 5%. I don't think any NBFC was borrowing. NBFC commercial paper on the other hand was at 10.5 level for the same thing. It was high right? Because it was 3 years, was a 1 to 1.5 year average commercial paper loans. NBFC the borrowing for that tenor at nothing more than that. So straight to 50 to 3 years.
The other example is after the gold loans originated by our gold NBFC company. It's taken out of the private sector. First, flow of money was not that aggressive, or two, there was a difference of around 200 basis points on the company's bank. So any questions or inputs? All of us are in the same space. If you have additional inputs, please do share with the group or any clarification that you would need. Question? Yeah, no. Me? Okay. Right. If you put time frame into perspective, absolutely yes. Will it happen in the next 1 year? No. But is that the direction where KGFS model is moving? Absolutely yes. See, two things. One, what facilitated the growth of the microfinance industry? One, the recognition that this is a sustainable business model. Two, flow of funds, both debt and equity, and entry of formal players into the whole sector. These are the three main reasons why the microfinance industry grew. The underlying reason for all these three to happen is a huge unmet demand. Right? People who are being served did not have or even don't have access to other formal financial services. Applying the same logic, the demand on the ground has not changed. There is a huge demand. What you have to basically prove is that the model is sustainable, that it can attract funding, both debt and equity, and that it is the wrong word. It is encouraging enough for mainstream players to get into this. And maybe some of the formal financial institutions could look at having a subsidiary or have different SBUs looking at different markets for this particular service. Say have a differently branded SBU. Or I just came to know, I don't know how many of you are aware of, I just came to know that there is an entity called HTB Financial Services, which is a 99% subsidiary of HDFC Bank, and HDB is HDFC Bank Financial Services, and they have 3 branches in Chennai. Personal loan, both, I don't think. It is LTV and telecommercial service, both.
SHG model they are using to this.
Oh, I didn't know that. They generate around 200 crores a month. So, as long as the market is available and there is an unmet demand, which is which is given, which is very, very evident, and there are operating structures and business models, which is what we have to prove, there is scope for that. The challenge for us at IFMR Trust and Rural Finance is how do you make that happen in a way that attracts more people, in a way that is easier, in a way that is efficient, and does not put a lot of burden on the market that we operate in terms of our clients. So that's our responsibility.
All of this are large. You brought up the fact that stage of the reports on the reports for the development of demand in the market. How do you think this is I'm not very up to date with how the training Europe has developed so far. Look at banks,
have to be current account is that's right.
It's good saying like
necessarily, typically if there is a capital trade, it's not. What I'm trying to say is that the RBI has asked current accountants to certify what they cannot certify. Really,
so that's part of the reason.
Long run, it's not necessarily change the long run. In the long run, there has to change. When UID comes in and there is a much better way of capturing income. So in the long run, clearly, this reporting cannot necessarily continue. But in today's market, it's extremely difficult, better than I do, to measure income at all. There are other parts of iPhone we're trying to do it for profit, equity queries or other ways of figuring out how much is how to actually earn. So that is not necessarily something that is giving investor in the short term. Actually, self-reported. And self-reported, there are many other separate examples of how borrowers have used systems to get what they want. So, for example, why is it so difficult to whether a borrower has one million savings? The same thing, it is self-reported. There are some parts of India where it doesn't seem to be actually very easy for us to figure out because borrowers self-report that they have to be loans of but other parts they completely can't. The process of it versus the 90s. So if the UP and all it, people are transferring. In Rajasthan, just don't. So depending on the same people for data or whether borrowing levels are exceeding 50,000 or not. Theoretically, you can figure if a person has let's say an auto rickshaw, it's clearly his body has gone out one shot. There are no two ways about it. He has a two-wheeler or something, then he will take at least the loan of 30, 40, 50,000 for that. There are some ways to find out. Are these people going to make an effort? Two-wheeler are quite high. Especially in areas like Rajasthan or Punjab or parts of Tamil Nadu and all, fuel penetration is extremely high. If you want to pick up more villages where half the village is a two-wheeler. So that clearly means that they have the way to go. Some people have a Tata 8. Tata 8 costs 2,20,000. So clearly they have taken time to taking no question about it. In addition, they would have had other ways of taking loans for crop loans. So technically, if you merge Kisan credit card data with the bank system or the NBFC system, you can figure out whether the borrower has taken a loan of 50,000 or not. If that kind of integration happens, then yes, then a lot of people will not be able to get it. Or at least not be able to connect it.
You also communicate a thought about using the BPL part of the process. Our household income in these areas might actually be about 50,000 versus in market price. So we automatically using it.
Yes, Bank, for example, has one idea of mind to say that let all MFIs use one single passbook. Same passbook applies for any MFI. So it's the passbook independent of the MFI. Means that automatically all know the difference. This is impossible. Practically, if you want to do it, you can. The only one thing which we have referred is that there are possibly going to be further regulations as well on NBFC MFI itself. This is only a starting point. So we are going to see more regulation which is going to be much more detailed, give it even more clarity or otherwise.
I think is actually very positive because now there is actually a recognition for this segment from the regulator. Till now it was broken here and there and being subjected to anything. But possibly there is some direction in which, right or wrong, as you said, there is significant
Regulation, there are going to be two more pieces of regulation. One is going to be an NBFC MFI based regulation which is going to go into other details which the Malayalam is going to and the other is the PSL regulation. Once we have all three in place, then we really know.
How it could be a similar that we agree to the existing regulation with respect to the responsibility because as the information flow becomes easier, especially to IT to large customer, like my existing customer would be excluded, right? Also, something like that, it doesn't solve the cost of the company usually benefits because it's just an arbitrary number. So, as I said, perhaps new regulations also will be advised to perhaps you know for that.
I think there's going to be a lot of research effort to go to the RBI to say that, whether it's CMI or whether it's from, IFRS or any or various other research institutes going to RBI and say that, here's evidence that 50% that's an inflation being and so on. Even before this actually came out, even how much that makes that Mariga wanted to raise this to say why it is that $50,000 I'm sure there's going to be a lot of push to the RBI to say that this number doesn't make no sense. The RBI does take financial issues very seriously. So, at the very least, we should have at least annual meetings.
It is evident that any number, the new number makes sense.
The number being there is a political number. It's not known out of the map. It's not clear. It's not known. As you can see, I mean, I very clearly said that only 30% of the clients come here from you. So clearly there is no economic reason. Even the Mariam committee report said that as of now, 30% of loans are used for different changes also. Hence we get a How does that make sense?
In urban areas, 1,20,000 is too much. Okay, then.
But we called another MFI right after the state of everything. That's what we do. Yeah.
More than 2 years. What I have is how many you inside the apps. Or you say that you expect more from because every the product has to be in
The other interesting there are MFIs in UP for certain. If you remember, I think Anil will know more about it. We were talking about each other to swap portfolio. So MFI and Rajasthan and UP were present both obviously to swap and so the bulk still Rajasthan between the idea has not spoken of that 50 crore net worth requirement of initial capital return of MFIs. Now at least for MFIs are still again, if that comes in, then there is going to be some level of stopping happening. Consolidation is very difficult to say. In the financial sector, you can't really have what you have in manufacturing, which is leverage. Companies borrow and use borrowed money to buy out other companies. Why can't it happen in the manufacturing industry? Because any financial company is already leveraged 3 times 4 times. Can they get additional debt to buy an MFI portfolio? They can if they pay exactly the book value. Right? Because then they are paying exactly on the ground without paying any premiums or growth or additional access and so on. Look at it this way. Suppose there are 2 MFIs, one size 100, one size 500. Okay. The larger entity wants to buy out the smaller one, but the smaller entity insists that my last entity happened at a premium of 3 times book, maybe 3 times. Where will the money come from? That money has to come from either the promoter of the larger entity putting more equity, or he gets a private equity investor to come and help him on say right? Why? But why will a private equity investor come and pay 3 times the 4 times in today's market? So you need to have a lot of equity power to start buying out other companies. Not very easy. You don't have too many MFI promoters who really can bring in that amount of equity and buy out. Private equity can, certainly. Private equity joint size is larger with one MFI and tries to buy out 3/4. That's possible.